Hi, Sam. Hi, Eric.
Hey.
We are going to get started. I'm just going to do a really quick intro, and then I'm going to hand over the floor to you guys. So, everyone, thanks for being on another episode of Lens with Advanced Design. My name is Hector Silva, and today's guest is Noyes. They are a group of creatives from all over, both geographically and prospectively, who built a friendship in Portland, Oregon. And I go way back with Sam, like when we were students, and that's the connection there. So I'm really happy that we're able to invite her on this session of Lens. And for those who are joining us from all over the world, thank you for being up or this late. I really don't know what the time frame is for people. I know in our past episodes, people are tuning in from Siberia, from the Philippines. So thank you so much for being part of our weekly Lens session. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Samantha Noyes and Eric Hernandez.
Hey guys, how's it going? So let's see. I'm gonna pull up a presentation in a minute, but you wanna go do it now?
Mm-hmm.
I thought we'd just introduce ourselves real quick. I'm Samantha, so I own Studio Noyes, which is, like Hector said, design consultancy based in Portland. We do mostly footwear design, so we work for companies all over the country and the world. I started doing design. I studied at DAP in Cincinnati, at University of Cincinnati, and then ended up working at ASICS out in Orange County. I actually met Hector on my first internship in I don't know, 2008 maybe. And from ASICS, I moved to Portland with Eric and then started freelancing. That was about 7 years ago. And then from there, just started to build up my client base and then ended up hiring on a team. So right now we're a team of 5, and we've been a team of 5 for maybe 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah, and I'm Eric Hernandez. I studied industrial design at Arizona State University, graduated in 2007, started working at K-Swiss as a freelancer in 2006 after an internship, worked there for about 4 years, and then went to Vans. Worked at Vans for about 2 years before moving up to Portland to work for Adidas Originals, and then transitioned into Adidas basketball, where I worked on projects like the launch of the James Harden line and the continuation of the Derrick Rose line. After 4 years at Adidas, Samantha's consultancy Studio Noyes had been growing really well, and she wanted to build out a team, and I thought it was time to join forces with her and take some of the experience that I had in the bigger corporations and help out and try and build and grow the team. So since then, we added on, in 2016, we added on 2 more designers, Jeff Proctor and Sean Masano. I think Sean's somewhere on this Zoom hiding away. And same thing, they've had experience at a lot of different places. Jeff was more of a graphic designer at the start, an illustrator, working at JDK on the East Coast on things like Burton snowboards, did some really amazing illustration and artwork on his own, and then ended up moving to Portland to join Nike SB for graphics, and then transitioned over to Nike basketball and did a ton of the graphics that you probably know from some of the more famous graphic applications on KD's, LeBron's, Kobe's. And then after a few years there, he moved on to Adidas, where I met him in Adidas basketball. Sean studied at Art Center in California, ended up doing sunglasses at Spy for a little bit before moving into footwear at Adidas, or Creative Rec first, and then Adidas Originals, where I met him. After Adidas Originals, he moved to the East Coast and worked at New Balance and PF Flyers before we convinced him to come back and join our team. And our newest member is Alex G, and she is working with us on color materials, and she's doing that as she's learning about footwear day to day, as this is her first time in really the footwear industry. So that makes up our team and kind of our various backgrounds. Like you said, geographically and prospectively, we're from all over the place. So it's been fun to work with our friends and build out a consultancy at the size we're at, where it's just enough to be chaotic, but small enough to still be fun and interesting every day. So did you want to jump into that?
Sure. So that's us. So Hector had asked us to talk about something that maybe we didn't learn in school, or that maybe isn't taught in school in industrial design, but that we've learned throughout what we do in the industry. So I thought a really good topic would be speaking to your audience. And by that, I mean, in school, we always learn to design to your consumer. You get a brief, you are researching who that is, problem solving for them, and then you design the product. So we all know that, so I'm not going to talk about that. But what we want to talk about is all of the other steps and all of the other audiences that you talk to along the way. I think first here, we're going to go through a little bit of our portfolio. We'll go through it pretty quickly just so you guys can get an idea of what we do. But keep in mind as we go through this quickly how we present things, and then we'll talk to you guys about how we present to clients and all of the other people along the way. So this is kind of like our statement of who we see that we are, clever solutions for complicated problems. This is just some of our clients. This is actually not up to date, but you can see we work with brands from Adidas all the way down to small brands on here that maybe you haven't heard of before. I think our smallest brand that we've worked with has 3 people. The biggest one, I don't know how many people Adidas has. A lot.
Yeah.
And everything in between, and all of them are cool in their own ways. So this is a little bit of what we call our lookbook, and this is not necessarily like our portfolio. We kind of have it segmented into different things that people view based on who that person is. That kind of goes into a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So this is a project we did with the North Face. This is the final product.
And just to give some context, we actually did make this a physical lookbook for when we went to conventions or trade shows to hand out. And so this was these are spreads of folded pages. So the layout is a little bit more breathable and open. And so again, talking about context and who we're showing, this just shows like, we didn't want to put blurbs. We didn't want to put anything beyond just, hey, take a look at what we do. If you're interested, our contact info is in here. Feel free to reach out. So go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, keep going. These are photos from the North Face website. They actually do really nice photos, which is cool. A little bit of exploration as to what we do for color, creating a cohesive collection.
This was a project that we've been working on with 361, a Chinese-based brand that has a bit of a US presence through running, specialty running and basketball. So just doing some concept exploration for them in design direction. Example of blueprints and tech packs that we've done for a brand like 361. Graphic and logo application for models and storytelling for 361 as well.
This is a project we did for Pendleton. Pendleton is a Northwest-based blanket brand. They've been around for a really long time, have been in the wool blanket and apparel space, have never been in the footwear space on their own other than doing collaborations. So we helped them to launch their line, figure out what that design language is, and what their brand means for footwear. This is an example of a blueprint for them. This is a brand called Forsake, so this is probably our smallest client. They're based in Boston. They came around on Kickstarter around 2012, and they wanted to create a brand that is basically like a cooler sneaker boot that you can hike in that isn't like the brown boot that you see everywhere at REI. These are some photos from one of the photo shoots that they did. And this is a little bit more of a lifestyle category for them. So getting into like, what does this mean for women? What do women want to wear outdoors?
This is some concepting we did for projects with Adidas on the continuation of the Derrick Rose line. I believe this was some early exploration for the Rose 9. This was a second iteration for the Crazy Light, one of the top selling low top basketball shoes for Adidas. I think this was considered the 2018 model. Some graphic exploration and how graphics can tie from a jacquard on the upper and create a tread pattern on the outsole. Again, some silhouette exploration for Adidas. Just looking at more how far can you push the silhouette, how far can you push the balance between midsole in the white area and upper on the black area. And then taking some of those concept explorations and looking at how those can be built into different shoes. And so this was actually Damian Lillard lifestyle shoe. So off court using his performance tooling or bottom midsole. And so looking at how we could do something that ties to his performance shoe, but gives him something more of an easy on, easy off, pre and post game type of feel. And this was, I believe the name of it was the Dame Dalla, which was his persona for when he's doing his hip hop career. And so he's quite a good rapper for being in the NBA. And we wanted to give him something that really tied to his way of thought and actions as a hip hop artist, not just a basketball player.
This is a project we did for the brand SIG. This actually never came out, so you can't look it up online, but SIG you might be familiar with as a water bottle brand from Switzerland. And so we were taking their brand DNA, super Swiss, very clean, and translating that onto outdoor footwear. This is some exploration on the outsole. So this goes all the way on the left from super training and like in the gym, and all the way on the right is super trail, so out like most aggressive trail running.
This is a little bit of Jeff's work. So in our previous office, we had probably a 30-foot by 10-foot wall, and this was actually some screenshots of his mural that he painted on there with just famous shoes and characters from all over the place. Talented artist. We've done a lot of graphics and illustrations in different ways based on his work. And then this is some stuff that, as Samantha mentioned, we're really footwear focused just because we all really have loved shoes along the way, but all of us have been taught and learned and studied industrial design in one way or another. And this is just showing there was a brand, Kanan, who is actually owned by Olakai, who was one of our footwear clients. They reached out saying, hey, we heard you do great work for Olakai. Are you guys interested in doing eyewear? And so we had Sean actually take the lead and work on some stuff since he had his previous experience in eyewear, and we created a full spring 19 eyewear line for men and women, as well as worked on consumer profiles for them, so helping them find their target consumer in a better manner. And here's just an example of one of those.
And then this maybe is the last one. So this is a brand called Ultra. Ultra is really heavy in the zero drop sort of barefoot running space, but specialty running. So it's a very targeted market, but they wanted to get into shoes that look more appealing to women. Their shoes are pretty masculine, and also shoes that feel just a little bit more lifestyle. You can wear them outside of just running. This was the final product. All right, so we're gonna get into what we're gonna talk about today. I wanna start with just this idea of Instagram communication, because this is so big right now. I think when Eric graduated, this wasn't even a thing at all. And when I graduated, this was like, people didn't really post their work on Instagram. It was just like there to post like your cat pictures or whatever. And they were like really grainy. But now this is such a huge thing. And I think what people think Instagram communication, or what people think design communication really entails, is what they see on Instagram. And that's very beautiful. And I'm not gonna lie, we probably posted this on our Instagram because it looks super cool. But what actually happens, and all audience you speak to when designing, especially for consultancy and what we do, is so much farther beyond this. So we started out by listing out all of those levels of communication. At the very bottom, you'll see designer to Instagram. So we'll talk about that later. But before that happens, there's all of these other steps. So there's the client speaking to the designer to the designer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and so I think the big thing is we can't claim to be experts on how to get followers on Instagram. We're not going to teach you how to hashtag the best way or figure out the algorithms, because we're not that. And we know we're not getting clients through Instagram. We just do this for design appreciation, to be able to present our work so that our moms and our friends can like things and show their friends. So a little bit of it is like, we obviously want to show our stuff off and we want to show the process as best we can. Some of it is being considerate to the client and knowing that they don't want to show certain parts of the process. But some of it is the down and dirty work is the most beautiful part, to see how things came to the process. And it's not just that beautiful final rendering, 3D model, or final shoe that means something. So we want to show what we do on a day-to-day and how that actually, 18 months of work on a pair of shoes turns out being one beautiful photo for a brand sometimes.
I see all you guys following us on Instagram right now. All right, so client to designer. So this is, for us, this is when we get a new project, super exciting, but then we get this brief and it might look like this. And this is like, probably for most of you guys that are designers, this is really not inspiring. Also, it's like really busy and I don't know where my eye goes. Maybe it looks like this with this really cool background. I might look like this, just an email with like some description of what they think they want. I want to highlight this. They wrote a dope AF shoe that instills confidence. This was literally a real email that we got. This was made in Microsoft Word. It's the best one. This was made in Excel. So these are like the variety of different types of briefs that we get. I think the audience here is us. The people speaking to us are the brand. They're probably the project manager, depending on the company size, maybe even the CEO, or maybe a design director, in which case maybe the briefs look a little bit nicer. But what's really important here is that it's our job as designers to listen to what they need. It's not their job to make a nice presentation. It's our job to try to pick out those little details and those little words that they say.
And so then moving on, this is designer to designer. So this is after the download. This is after we've got the majority of our questions answered about what's missing from the brief, what targets we should be looking for. And we've given a timeline of, we will pitch back to you with our research and initial sketches, but this is our team talking to our team for the most part. So
this is, for me, the most fun. I would say it's probably the most fun for all of us, except Eric really loves tech packs. So this is just a snapshot of, we're going to take you through one specific project that we did for the North Face, so you can see the steps from all the way from the beginning to the end. So this project for the North Face was a collection called Back to Trail. They briefed us with one of those beautiful briefs that you just saw, and then we took that and we started to create this mood board in our office. And we went and did a huge deep dive. We actually went to their office. You can see Eric there wearing this super expensive, what's that called?
It's the exploration suit for K2 and above, so Everest style insulation. Yeah, and it was about 100 degrees.
It was really hot that day. So anyway, we like went into their office. We took our whole team there. We did a deep dive. We looked at all of their equipment, all of their apparel, all of their finishes and things like that, their materials, their history of their footwear. Went back to our office and we just had a lot of discussions and we created these mood boards, and it's a very collaborative process. So this is where I have the most fun.
I think one thing to note, to give a little bit of background, the Back to Trail collection and what you'll see is the final result was the North Face doesn't have a long history in footwear. I think it was about 1997 was the start. And they saw with how everything was going in terms of 90s retro, especially in outdoors being so popular, they wanted to be able to fit the mold, and they asked us what we would do. And so a little bit of it was figuring out their DNA, seeing how we can pull DNA from other parts of the brand, like their equipment and their apparel, and give them something that felt honest without saying, hey, we made a fake 1990s running style outdoor hiker. We wanted to give them something that felt relevant for the time, but didn't just fill a gap that they never really actually had.
Yeah, so for designer to designer, and especially for us being a small team of 5, our audience is ourselves. And so because we're all designers and because we all know how to understand a sketch like this, we keep the sketches super light. This is not something that we show anyone except for you guys right now. So it's quick, it's fast, it's just to get the ideas out. The longer you spend working on a sketch like this, the less time you have to get more ideas out.
And I think another thing to put in context is, while we could take the time to finesse one design over and over again and get it to that really beautiful shiny render and sketch, our briefs were for not just this category, but 2 other categories plus short timelines. So we had at this time, just through the North Face, not including any of our other clients, probably around 12 different styles that needed to be completed. So this is why we don't take too much time at the start. We keep it really rough. We keep the capabilities of kind of sorting these out and seeing where these ideas best fit through all those briefs, not just for the one story, but for all the stories that we're talking about at once.
Yeah, Lavian, I know you said you might get on this call, so if you're here, I know you know this story, but one of my internships was at Teva, the sandal company based out in Santa Barbara. And I had this one project and I spent a really long time making this beautiful render of it because I wanted to impress all the designers there and my boss, and they thought that it was great. And then I got in trouble for spending too much time on it because all the time I spent doing that, I could have been spending iterating and creating more ideas. Just some other initial work that we do. So this is just showing ways that we can work through outsoles and creating different patterns. It's not always just rough sketches, but it might be rough iterations in Illustrator or in 3D or whatever is your method of working.
And the background of this is so much of the North Face's background in geodesic domes and tents and the triangle, the rule of thirds. They had a lot of ideas that went around threes and tries and structural integrity. And so we use that as a baseline on how to build out lugs and outsole zoning.
And then, so this is just an example of us being our own audience. And also the idea of collaboration. We'll print out all these sketches. There's a lot of different ways we'll do it. Maybe we'll put it up on a screen and we'll talk through it as a group, or we'll print everything out and then kind of draw over each other's sketches. Nothing is sacred at this point. It's all about, everyone sees a different thing in a different sketch or a different image. So it's really about, working together. All right, so then we go to designer to client. And there's 2 different ways that we mainly work with clients. One is a designer client and one is a non-designer client. So the first one we're going to talk about is the designer client. And this is where, so those boards that we made, those mood boards and all of those images that we had, we're going to button that up a little bit and make it a little bit more digestible and narrowed down. And we'll put together this sort of like mood board presentation. So this is just an example of one of them that we did. And this one speaks to that Back to Trail collection that we're working on. And then because this was presented to a design team, they wanted, and this is where like, it kind of depends on the brand and you have to sort of feel out like what they're looking for, but they wanted this to be collaborative. And so we didn't want to present to them like final sketches at the beginning. They wanted to feel like they were a part of it and we wanted to feel like we were a part of their team. And so we took those initial sketches and we just cleaned them up a little bit. And this is the level that we presented to them. The second level was like, all right, the design director is going to be in this meeting. We want these to look good, but we also don't want them to look like they're finished because they're not finished. So we want to make sure that like visually we're speaking to the idea that these are still designs and they're still sketches, they're not final.
And again, just looking at, as we start to get feedback, people that we meet within the team from the North Face, developers, people that are actually working through how the functional work, giving us different paths and strategies on how to resort things, creates this kind of dynamic of, okay, well, we had an purely aesthetic idea that now we need to build out into zones and functionality. So creating that same tread pattern, but adjusting it based on paths and strategies of how they want to tell their story of what traction means to the brand.
All right, and then we're going to go to designer, client, but this is not the designer. So this is maybe the project manager. This is maybe
Development.
A developer, a VP, someone that's a little bit higher up, or just someone that's like leading a different team who's not the design team. So here we drew this up in Illustrator and rendered it. Everything is to scale. The proportions are correct. This is where you might present to someone who they don't really understand how to read sketches, and you can't blame them for that. That's not their job. So it's our job, them being the audience, to cater to what they understand. Some commentary in the past, like as we learn how to work with all of these different types of people, are like, this is blue and I hate blue. And so they can't see past the fact that it's blue. Or like, well, it's probably just a sketch, but so you like want to try to avoid all of those things. And so this is sort of the level that we'd present. Also things that we do is like put this in a presentation, maybe have some reference imagery, have things that reference back to their brief that they gave us. So like the price point, the name, call out some things, make sure to write. So we'll always write like a little blurb of text, because this is inevitably going to be passed around the company and you don't know who's going to read it. They're also probably going to forget everything you say when you present it to them. So just like a little bit of a reminder when you're giving this presentation to them.
Then moving on, at this point, you want to be able to describe and explain all the different things that are happening on the shoes. So we go into all the different views, medial, lateral, toe downs, again, to scale, built off of the last, making sure that everything is vetted as best as you can, so that if there are questions about costing, about materialization, about construction, that you know how to answer those things. So why is it raked weird? Why does the top go straight back and look like it would hit your foot? Well, because it's a booty construction. It has a seam there, but that would be purely for aesthetics. So on the shelf, it would have a dramatic effect, but once you slip it on, it'll fit because it's stretch, and it'll change the visual of the silhouette on foot. So we start to have that type of dialogue with the team to make sure if whoever is going to answer that question knows how to answer it properly. And then again, just looking at how that pattern moves along with what happens on the toolings. And so again, then looking at how this starts to refine and be adjusted based on what our next steps were.
This is just an example of like getting feedback. What does that say? Okay.
No, I'll answer questions.
Okay. Sorry, we just saw questions. So the communication goes both ways, and we're the audience in part of that time when receiving feedback. So sometimes we're getting this like huge deck of feedback, but sometimes it's literally just this email that we got with a lot of exclamation marks, which is cool.
Yeah. And I think this is context as well, depending on how much work you show and how much you're willing to share with a client. Sometimes we would only get 2 briefs, and those 2 briefs would then become 4 to 6 shoes. And so obviously that helps us along the way, because that builds out what our original proposal would then be expanded upon costing for all of those. And of course, along the way, you have to think when these are done, completed, developed, and samples, there's still a chance that someone will get killed. So the more options you get in, the more chance of things going through all the way to production.
All right, so once you go through that phase, you're getting approval on designs. They're like, yes, let's make this. So the next section is probably the longest, and that is designer to factory. And factory can mean a lot of different things in basically any part of the world. So this is the developer. This is the developers at the factory. This might be material suppliers, 3D resources. Yeah.
So this is an example, and as Samantha said, the research part is her favorite part. I geek out on the actual tech packing and blueprints. So this is where I try and step up as much as I can to help out, and end up working on blueprints quite a bit. And so this is an example of, after all those sketches, after all those rounds, we end up getting to something of a final execution. And so here you can see we do section views. We work entirely in 2D. For a client like the North Face, they have 3D resources. The tooling factory does 3D. They do 3D models for uppers as the first round of sampling. So we only need to work in 2D to be able to get these things explained to the factory and to their resources. So this lays out in the same way that a factory would then pass back a blueprint. So it has the different sections and different areas that you'd want to explain what's happening. Because this is a repeated pattern and there's maybe 3 or 4 different lugs just placed along zoning areas, we create a key of what those different lugs look like over on the side. And that way they can just denote a couple times versus us having to draw all the sections in different places through different parts of the lug. So that helps in terms of just simplifying the way things work. And then the focus is on how the actual midsole is sculpted. And then material callouts are very simple on this one because it was a pretty low cost tooling with just a midsole foam in EVA and then a 2-color rubber.
Yeah, I think, so this is an example of an upper tech pack where we're calling out things like measurements, construction details. We'll get into more construction on the next page. One thing to remember, or a few things to remember, most of the time the people that are getting these tech packs and blueprints, English is not their first language. So making sure that this is as easy to understand as possible for anyone who may be looking at it. These people are not designers. They don't care how cool your sketch looks. It's really just about like how cleanly can you describe your design intent. And then I think the last thing is this is probably months after you got that original brief, depending on what timeline you're on. You have to remember to make sure that you're keeping the original consumer in mind. Sometimes you get to this point and you kind of forget what that original brief is, but as the designer, that's your job to make sure that you're keeping that intent in mind, because all of these people working on this shoe from here on forward, they probably don't even know what that brief is.
And I think something else to note about that is the brief can always change within, the 2 to 3 months that were occurring and we were going through design reviews. Money ended up going in terms of retail from $95 shoe to $125 shoe back to $115 shoe as people saw it, as the company reviewed it, as people figured out where we could slot this in. A few other pages from the tech pack. This shows internal construction. And so you can actually see it's a section view through basically the center of the shoe, showing how we would construct it, how we build it out, how things are folded over each other, what's cemented, what's stitched, thicknesses, internal constructions. And they actually use this because their goal was to sample in 3D versus going to the factory first, was they used this to actually model every layer and build out from the last outward using our actual sections. So it was very important for them to see this in the most detailed manner possible. And then this is an example of a material map. So for some brands, we'll be able to call out materials. For other brands, they have preferred vendors or they have preferred materials that they want to use. So you can see here, we spec'd out more specific reaprenes and packages. On others, we just said, well, this is a molded rubber piece, so we'll have them spec however they want to do it.
So this is a screenshot of the folder for this project in what we call phase 4, which is the revision phase. So this is anything from the very beginning handoff to the factory all the way through when we would do our last revisions on the last samples. So you can see how many different dates and different categories of revisions there are and how we keep track of those.
So you can see it's just under a year. So this is the longest part by far. And for a lot of clients, just take our tech packs and say thanks and we'll do their own thing. The most successful projects we have are ones where we can be collaborative and work with them as a team all the way to confirmation before sending out the final shoes for photo shoots, for catalogs and whatever else, because the design intent can stay true longer. So sometimes we see shoes on the shelves where we can't even tell whether that's something we worked on because it was handed off so early on in the process, versus this, we knew exactly what was going on. And by the end, there was only a few things that were changed based on necessity more than anything. So as I mentioned, they went straight to 3D modeling for sampling. So what they wanted to do was do these 3D models, send the 3D models and 3D prints to the factory and tell the factory, hey, make it look exactly like this, which is a really interesting and different way of going than what's usual, where we'll just send tech packs and they'll send back pullovers and prototypes that the factory works on directly. Having this resource was really interesting and kind of an odd way of working, but it was nice in some manners. As you can see here, they just wanted us to redline over the 3D models, so moving things around, adjusting things, and because these were one-to-one, we could actually say, move this over 2 millimeters, adjust this and lengthen it by 1 millimeter here. This section was taken from the 3D model where we took this model into Rhino, took a section, and then redrew what we thought was right based on that location.
This is an example of a shell pattern. So this is basically the whole shoe, but if you flattened it out. This is typically how we would do revisions because it's a one-to-one, and you can move a tiny line just a millimeter and they'll actually reference that line versus going back and like guessing where it might be on the 3D.
Just another example in the notes we would pass along. And then using that same process for the model itself. And so you can see, again, taking sections from the 3D model itself, showing what we would do. It helps us from getting into the weeds of having to model everything or remodel everything ourselves, as the turnaround times from these teams that are experts is way faster than we could ever fiddle around with any of this stuff. So we can honestly say we're not experts at 3D, and so why would we take the time and even waste or cost the brand time where they have their own resources? We love to use the resources that they have. And so this is how we worked with them, and they were very appreciative of how this worked. It was a good middle ground for both sides. But even down to the nitty gritty of textures, we wanted textures in a certain angle based on the path of the tread on the outsole. And so we had to give really clear guidelines on how that worked and how each thing biased and adjusted.
This is an example. We don't have a ton of photos of samples from this round, but typically each of those folders you saw on that screenshot, there's probably a round of what we would call pullovers. So they're creating the sample, but in materials that maybe aren't right, and there's just revisions after revisions after revisions. The one on the left here, you can see like someone put their toe up because the construction is not right. The one on the right, it was like trying to tweak how the lettering worked on the webbing. So things like that, it's just communicating back and forth with the factory, and then also working with the client to make sure that we're kind of bridging the gap between what they want and what's being produced. Just a few other, those images are really blurry.
So then moving on to, once everything's sampled, all these first pullovers and first samples of the full shoes are going back to the client. We start to work with the product managers and the merchandisers. So this is the person that's going to read how these samples and how all these shoes go to market, how they get shown at the store, online, how many SKUs they need, how many styles they really want, what the prices are. And so a lot of things can change. So because these people, again, aren't typically designers or don't have the greatest eye for being able to read past what may be a bad sample, again, the North Face having these models, we were able to render these up and do exactly what we wanted with materials, with colors, and be able to show a merchandiser, hey, like this is the intent. Don't read into the sample. The sample's still not correct, but here's a reference for what it will look like. And then starting to work into colors and materials and seeing how things can block, how we can start to adjust and rearrange. And this was a big one in terms of requesting something like, this is the launch color blocking. This would be a color blocking for a collaboration with somebody like Bodega. This would be, you know, exclusive for the UK. And so it was starting to say like, look, one shoe can look in a lot of different manners so that it can either have longevity or specialty and uniqueness for each different place that it's going.
All right, and then, so your project's done. It's going back to the brand and how the brand is speaking to the consumer. So all of that is this one post on their website. And so you can see like they actually do a really great job of taking photos. I think this on the right shows they call out the benefits, they list out 2 sentences of details, and then they call out a few features. So all of those things that we started with are kind of, they're not ever really called out. You have to make sure that they're embodied in that design. So you're getting all of those points and communication and design language across through the product, because it's not going to be called out in the features on the website like a year and a half later.
Yeah, and I think this is where it starts to diverge where what goes to the consumer is very straightforward. They're going to like the shoe or they're going to not. They're going to like the price or they're going to not. They're going to read a couple sentences. And then there's a person that really is interested in the product. And that's where you get into the press releases, where a brand like Nike does such a good job with marketing and advertisement, being able to go to Nike News to be able to read even more into the tech, having a video, that ends up becoming like, what point in the brand was this product? Was this just to hit a very specific price point? Was it to get to a very specific retailer? Because while this was happening, they were doing a big release of hiking, and the hiking was the more important thing for a brand like the North Face. So the marketing dollars went there. And so we just had to make sure that this was as good as it could be for the amount of attention it may get. So then you move on and you can see what happens when PR goes well. And so this is going from the blog to the consumer.
Yeah, so this is like, we never know if this is going to happen or not. It's always a surprise. We are just browsing Hypebeast and then we come upon a shoe design, which is cool, unless it looks shitty, which we've seen too. But this one, I think they did a really great job. So 2 on the left, like matching it up with the apparel, looks amazing. 1 on the right, totally different vibe, totally different consumer, but like same idea. They're matching it up with the apparel.
And so this is a big conversation internally with the North Face, where the North Face in the US, outside of Supreme collaborations and some really streetwear based things, it's still an outdoor brand, and you don't really get this type of apparel when you go to the northface.com or to their stores. But then if you go to the UK, Europe, anywhere in Europe, and Asia, and Japan specifically, you get these amazing collaborations, these amazing colorways, and these unique looks and feels that are so different than what you would see at REI for the North Face, where this shoe never made it to REI stores, but it was online at REI. But then if you went to the UK sites, it was selling out in certain places in certain colorways because of the way that it was released in those different regions.
Yeah, so then going back, we have this great portfolio piece. And this is what we ended up posting on our Instagram. So we wanted to show off a mix of some of the technology and like the outsole patterning work that we did, some images of the actual footwear in different colorways. Actually didn't show any sketches here, I guess. But then what we might show a potential client and what we would say is our portfolio. We picked out all of these sketches all in grayscale, put them all together on one page so we can show them the breadth of exploration we can do as a team. But then we also want to show them our final product too. All right, so that's all we got, guys. I see there's a lot of questions here. Hector, how do you typically want to do Q&A if we have time?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually the questions that are mentioned in the comment section, usually it's questions that happen in the moment because people are excited to see what you guys are sharing. But you feel free to run by those questions in the chat, or people can come forward and ask the questions and here digitally.
Yeah, let's go through the ones in the chat, and then if we have time, you guys can ask.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So first question says, how much time is spent brainstorming, concepting versus CAD? It all depends. On this project, we had a good amount of time to actually take a lot of opportunity to research. So we, like Samantha said, we went to their headquarters. We spent a day with them, almost 2 days with them, going through their history, going through the background, seeing all their current product, future product, what their goals were, looking at their creative direction. And then we had probably another 2 weeks before we really had to pitch back. And that wasn't even getting to sketching. That was just to say, hey, this is what we call down from your brand. We know that there's not a good, solid footwear baseline for what you're asking from us. This is what we're pitching to you. And then from there, we started concept. And so that was probably another 2 to 3 weeks of sketching.
Fast.
Yeah. So that was a good amount of time for us versus a lot of other clients. So 2 to 3 weeks on both brainstorming and concepting. And then CAD, actual technical design, working into tech packs, is probably another 2 to 3 weeks for this project.
Do you want to contrast that with like your time to do this?
Yeah. So then when we're like I mentioned, we may be working on 12 styles for one client, 3 styles for another client, and there's 5 of us dividing that up over similar timelines and schedules because everybody's trying to launch at the same times for the same seasons. At Adidas, when I was in basketball, I had 3 projects, and I had almost 6 months to work through those. So it's such a drastic difference in how much time and effort, but also how many different meetings and guidelines and regulations and politics you go through in a company like Adidas slows down the process so much. So in that 6 months that people think, oh, you're a designer, you're designing, I was spending most of my time going from meeting to meeting, trying to get the information I needed from the product manager, the developer, figuring out if Germany was okay aligning with this, or if running was going to use Boost, can we use Boost? Are they going to use this new technology? Should we align, or is it specific to somebody else? So in 6 months, you may only have actually a week or 2 to do true design work still. So in terms of the amount of design time, it's pretty similar.
All right, so next one. Would the render style on slide 58 go into tech pack?
It was like a full render.
Oh, okay.
So typically, no, we would have just black and white line art, one colorway maybe, just to show how it blocks. And then if there's a rendering or anything, it's up to the brand to send that to the factory as well, whether they want that seen by the factory or not. Third question, how do you bridge the gap between your understanding of the brand and the company's expectations from you in terms of adding value?
You can answer that
one. Between your understanding of the brand. So our first step, like I mentioned, is the researching. And so we have to get a ton of understanding of the brand really quickly. I think a thing that a lot of companies appreciate about us is that we are still here and there sneakerheads. We still love fashion, style. We run, we do the workouts and exercises and the activities that everybody's asking us to work into. And so they see that we already have a baseline understanding of what the brand is meant to be and for the consumer they're looking for. And then in terms of knowing, like, well, if we could do this at any price point and for anybody, we would do it at $150 and we would give them all these different features. But in reality, the brand says, well, this shoe has to be $110 and it has to come out in 6 months. Well, then we have to kind of find the middle line and toe the line of reality versus idealist in design. And so for us, we push the design intent as far as we can, but we have to respect the brand's needs and goals with each project. Some of them have longer timelines and some of them give us more freedom, and some of them we have to just know that this is going to be a box that needs to be checked. So I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think the next two kind of go together. So do you prototype before you get to the manufacturing phase? Also very interested to hear about prototyping in footwear. Sometimes like we'll like take a last, or which is like the form that the shoe is built around, or an existing shoe. A lot of designers will like tape up and then draw on that. I personally tend to just go straight into 2D sketching because I think I get ideas out faster. I know for the North Face, actually, one of those projects, we were like wrapping pieces around the last just to see like how the lines wrap around the heel and like if that actually works.
Yeah, there was a lot of odd patterning that we tried on a few things. So making sure things fold in the right place, adjust. We don't necessarily have like a maker lab or anything that some of the bigger companies have. So we don't have that access. But because the timelines are so tight sometimes, but also we have the resources of the brands, they'll offer up those opportunities to say, do you have any ideas that you want to send along early? Do you want to try and get something stitched up or sampled in a material? Do you want to get outsole modeled really quickly or a sample so that we can check it out, especially if they want to test it for performance. So a lot of those things, abrasion, hotspots, pinch points, they'll work through and make sure that we have the resources we need to get some of that prototyping done early. Next question, can you talk about how you negotiate your design fees for those late phase tech pack revisions, and how do you secure that work as opposed to the client just having the factory make revisions?
Good question. It really depends on the brand. So for the North Face, we basically, like, we'll give them a proposal all the way up to tech pack. This is pretty standard. And then we'll charge hourly for revisions. It really depends on how much the brand wants us to take over the process versus if they just, like Eric said, sometimes they'll just be like, give us the sketch and then we'll take it on, which is not my favorite, because I think we do a lot better job when we can see the design intent all the way through to the end. But we also understand brands have budgets and sometimes they don't have the ability to let us take it all the way through to the end.
And I think with some of those, we've in some proposals where we're really excited about working with the brand, we'll offer up a couple of rounds of revisions upon first sample, just to make sure that we can correct things and help them get to the right path, because it's sometimes a horror story as to what comes back from the factory. And if we don't see it, we don't know where it's headed. We don't know if they see the first samples and the people that were paying us are just terrified and are like, why did we even pay to get this designed? When we know we can adjust it and make those things work. And so, again, it depends on the budget that they give us and offer us. And then we'll do our best to try and work through all the way to, confirmation sample.
All right. Does your studio generally do these final design revisions, or does the client review and make these tweaks? But have you guys implemented them with the factory?
Again, it's a mix. I think some will ask us, what do we think of something? Even if they know they can't pay us, they'll still let us see the samples so that we can at least give our opinions and say, hey, like, we really want to make this work. We can help out. Or just say, hey, we would really take a step back, and maybe it's the material, maybe it's this, maybe it's that you guys can work on to help get it to the right path. So again, it just depends on the client. A lot of times also, if they have internal design teams, some of those designers that we've spoken with along the way can at least take things on and keep an eye on it, so that we can feel comfortable with knowing that we are not necessarily a part of those post tech back processes.
This is a good question. Do you guys get involved, or sorry, I added guys in. Do you get involved in any post-design processes? Example, creative direction of a photo shoot, marketing, packaging, etc. So no, that's not our specialty, although I would love to be a part of those things. I think if anything, a lot of times brands will ask us for our, I don't know, opinion or how we envision those going, and then they'll take it on, and whether it's another agency or an internal team working on those different things. I was a part of a few photo shoots for a few different brands. I don't know if you were at Adidas. Yeah. As a team, we don't typically get to be a part of those things.
Yeah. I think the big one is if we give strong enough creative direction at the start and storytell enough, certain brands will be really excited about that, ask for those decks to make sure that they have them along the way and be able to keep presenting as that is the story until it gets to the end. And so, it's the difference. We can't tell the story through the website slide that we showed you, but we can see where some of that storytelling and color direction worked through on like what Hype Beast presented that was photo shoots from Europe, where they really liked that story from us. So next one, the different shoe has different purpose. Could you share an example about the outsole pattern that you think is the most challenging or interesting that meets the function, purpose, and aesthetic? And how do you discover that? Yeah, I mean, we work on everything from safety shoes, nursing shoes, basketball shoes, golf shoes, dancing shoes, hunting boots, to hiking outdoor. So it's kind of ridiculous how many things and how many different brands have their different point of views on what works and what doesn't. We have to blend a little bit of what the brand sees as their vision and what they think is the best process to make things work, to make things follow their guidelines and best practices. And sometimes it's just a little bit of like trusting your gut. Sometimes aesthetic works, form follows function and vice versa sometimes. And so there's sometimes where we have a vision of what it should look like, and we just have to beg for a brand to test it. And we did that with the Harden shoe, the first Harden shoe. They didn't believe that traction was going to work. And Jeff, our designer, and myself worked on that. And we had them test it. And he loved it so much, he almost didn't want to have it changed for his second shoe. And it tested off the charts to the point where we actually had to make it not as good at being traction heavy because it was sticking too well. So, we try our best in researching what works and what doesn't through the industry. And then we take our point of view and our take and kind of filter it into what is best practices.
How do most of your clients find you? So, like I said, not Instagram. I would say at least 90% of our clients find us by word of mouth. The footwear industry is relatively small and people move around a lot. So it's like someone will work somewhere that you're working and then they'll leave and go to another company and they like your work, hopefully. And so then they'll call you up and that just keeps happening. So I would say that's probably how we've gotten most of our work.
Yeah. So yeah, keep a good reputation. The next one, props for the clean file organization. Thank you. It's a daily struggle. We have some folders that say Jeff and Sean and other, so it gets tough. Next one, are there common parts of the briefing process that are missed that you go back to the client to clarify, like commonly missed things that the client might forget, be foggy about for the beginning?
Every time.
Always.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of have to like think about questions that you have and make sure you ask those at the beginning, because if you assume and then you realize they didn't tell you later, then it's still somehow your fault.
Yeah. It could be they didn't have a last shape that they wanted. It could be that they didn't tell you that it was supposed to be a new tooling, which is actually cost for us in terms of how much work it is. It could be they didn't have a consumer target or a consumer profile.
Things you think would be like really obvious, but I think they're so in their day-to-day and in their own brand that they forget that we're an outside agency and maybe we don't know all of those things. Why do you think the chemistry of your team has been so successful? What are characteristics that you think have been essential to your team? Do you want to talk about that?
I think the big one is, for better or worse, every day we built the team as friends. And so my goal when we talk about goals was I just want to hang out with my friends and design stuff. And so day to day, like, it is a struggle to have to work with your friends and know that sometimes you're going to have a shitty day and it might be a friend thing that causes a problem. It may be that you know your friend too well and it causes personality issues where you just don't want to see that person that day. Other times you struggle to have to tell somebody and critique their work and know that it's going to cause them to be upset or offended or feel bad. Sometimes it's that things aren't getting done and we have to hold people to certain standards. And even between us, like, we're married, she's my boss, I was her mentor. So like we get in struggling fights daily. But I mean, it's so rewarding. I wouldn't have left my job if I didn't think it was going to be something worthwhile. And so now, like, the way that we work day to day, the chemistry has to be there, because if we don't want to talk for more than a day at a time to each other, the way that you may be able to avoid your manager at a bigger company or avoid your coworker, that can't happen here. We can't miss a day. What are the challenges you guys face in terms after the design has been sent to the factory? Costing is a lot of the time. Missing details, missing things in terms of rushing. A lot of times, because of timelines, the factories are being rushed, things not being handed oftentimes at the right time. We have to then figure out what was missed, what wasn't viewed. Did we misinform them of something? Did the developer misinform something? Did they actually not tell them, like, did the developer not tell them to do something because of cost and they knew it just wasn't going to happen? There's a lot of conversations that need to be had that sometimes don't end up happening.
Yeah, and then something that I think is one of Eric's like strongest points as a designer is working with the factory in construction and like figuring, like, problem solving. So we'll go over to the factory, not right now, obviously, but maybe a few times a year, depending on the client, and try to figure out what some of those challenges are, whether it's like, we don't understand how to make this, or this literally can't be stitched because the layering doesn't work. And so Eric is really good at like trying to problem solve with the people that are working in the factory, whether that's pattern making or like figuring out a new way to make something work to get that visual right.
Wondering if you can expand on the origins of the studio. How did you transition from an in-house design to freelance studio? How did you reach out to your own clients?
Yeah, so I started sort of by default because Eric moved up to Portland when we were living in LA, and I was really pissed because I loved LA, but I moved anyway. And I just started freelancing for ASICS, who I was previously working in-house for. which was a really nice transition to Portland. But in my contract, I was allowed to work for whoever else I wanted as long as it wasn't a direct competitor. So I just slowly started to reach out to anyone who seemed like they may need help or maybe had a connection to someone else. And it was really, really slow at first, but eventually it started growing. And it's, like I said, everything's word of mouth. So you do good work for one person and then that multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. So I got to the point eventually where I had too much work. And so the choice was either just say no to clients, which you never want to do, or hire someone. And so I was like, I don't know, I guess I'll try this out. So I actually hired an intern first just to see how I would do as a boss. And I guess I did okay. So ended up hiring on a team. I actually hired on 3 of the 4 other members within 3 months of each other, which is a little bit crazy. Maybe I would not recommend doing that.
Do you do a few user interviews as a part of your design process? It depends. We try and do anything as much as like trying to find the target consumer, see if we can talk to those people. A lot of times that info is given to us by the clients because they've paid a research group to do that, which is tens of thousands of dollars a lot of the times. So we have to rely a lot on what they can give us. And then again, because especially in Portland, in terms of outdoor activity and exercise and working out, and even just people that work for other competitors are so plentiful, we can usually find people that do the activities that we're designing for. So we'll always try and make sure that we talk to somebody if we can, but sometimes it's just there's not enough time to do it ourselves, so we have to rely on what the clients give us.
Do you guys? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to interrupt and ask a question if I can disrupt this awesome organic conversation that's happening. So I love what you guys do as far as a team, and I've spoken to Sam about this in the past. You guys take these trips as a team to kind of, keep that energy going, to inspire your team. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, like Hector said, we've tried to do what we call an inspiration trip every year. I think this is something that big companies do really well. We did it at ASICS, and I know Eric did it at Adidas. And I wanted to take that idea and bring it into our small team. It's a lot easier with a small team. So the first year we took all of us, when it was 4 of us, to Mexico City. Eric and I had been there and we really loved it. And we thought that it was a great place to take the team. I know people ask, like, what are you doing that's directly translating to design? And it's not necessarily direct translation for me. It's a little bit more of like being with the team and experiencing a new culture. Inevitably, that's going to inspire you. It might not be like a specific thing that you're drawing from that you're like, I saw that bridge and then I made it into a design, but it's like being around the culture and eating at the taco shop on the street and observing how people interact with their environment, I think is really like what we get out of that. The second year we had a lot of trips to China for work, and so we actually took the whole team to Shanghai and Beijing, which was totally different but also really cool experience. And then this last January we went to Guadalajara, which was awesome.
So a lot of the time it's an interesting mix because work doesn't stop. So every time we've gone traveling, we're also working on projects. So like Samantha said, it doesn't mean that we go to a lucha libre wrestling match and then create amazing shoes that are inspired by that. Literally, it's more just that we're hanging out together 24/7 in a place where everybody's unfamiliar with what's going on, and we actually it's a bonding trip. It's to make sure we can talk. Get tired of each other, get drunk together, fight, like whatever, physically fight. But I think we all get very appreciative when we come home of like, that was awesome, but it's nice to be home. It's nice to have our things back in order. It's nice to be able to sit back at our desks and just crank sometimes. But it gives us some tension, a way to get rid of our tension, a way to talk about stuff outside of the office so that we can talk just like friends again and not be thinking about deadlines all the time.
Yeah, I also think being in a different environment, just like it sparks your brain and creativity in a different way for whatever reason, which is really hard right now when none of us can really leave our houses. But I always notice that like we come back totally refreshed and have new ideas. Hector, I know we're over time. Is it cool to keep going or?
Absolutely, yeah. It's really up to you guys.
Okay, cool. Where were we?
Do you guys create concept arts or more like futuristic versions of design? I think of our team, I think Sean's probably the one that pushes and sketches for fun the most. And Jeff, I think, does a lot of illustration and art in terms of playful things that don't really tie to briefs. We don't get too much into futuristic things unless it's really a brief. And I think it's more just the matter of time that we have to really play around with things and push. Some brands ask us for things 2 to 3 years out. Some brands ask us for things 2 months out. And so it just depends on what our workload looks like to how far we can push out. So.
What's one favorite project you've gotten to be a part of? I would actually probably say the North Face was a really good one for me. I think that it was the first time our whole team that was right after we hired one of our last designer. And that was, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a chance for all of us to really shine at what we do, but also try out different things. For me, it's the best example of all of us working together like perfectly. And it really shows in the final product. I think we did a really good job on all of the different projects we worked for with them. It was also cool to work with a brand that has such a big presence, but maybe not in the category we were working on. So we still had a decent amount of freedom to determine like what their design language was. But with having a big brand surrounding that.
Yeah, they had great structure, capabilities and everything else. So we never had to worry about things going awry or getting screwed up. And we had great partners in the brand that were willing to back us up and make sure that our visions could pass through as easily as possible.
So. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Their team was really great to work with, which is nice. That's not always the case.
Yeah. And then, have you ever had research come back unsuccessful? If so, how do you maintain those client relations? The research part, I don't know if we've really had anything that missed too hard. I think the clients will always catch you before it goes too far, because if they see that something's wrong at the start, they don't want to pay for the rest of it. So they'll make sure they course correct early on. We have had a few projects that just never took off, where things didn't work out. And a lot of the time it's the relationship. It's either the project we're working on isn't important enough to keep the dialogue going from their side, or they think that and assume that we can take on more than what we were paid for or what the proposal or bid was for. And so then the tensions start to build in terms of like, well, hey, this wasn't paid for. We are willing to do it, but we want to make sure that we're covered, because it takes time and effort that we have to use somewhere else sometimes. So those conversations are always hard, and we have to, admittedly, some of those are clients that we don't work with anymore. And sometimes we question ourselves and what we did wrong. And sometimes we just have to know, like, that project sucked and we just got to move on. And so, like Samantha said, because we work so much off of recommendations from people that have worked with us previously, we do our best to keep everything as good as possible. And if we know something didn't work well, we'll always try and write it, and it'll be, we'll eat the cost if we have to. We'll take the hit because we want to show that we know what we're doing. What does a factory visit look like in footwear? Sounds like you're able to travel to vendors even as an outside firm.
Yeah, so that also depends on the project and their budget and their internal resources, I guess. So some companies like the North Face, they sent Eric to the factory with their development team. They, I think as a company, really respect design and wanted us to follow through with our vision from start to finish, which is really cool. Some brands, they don't have the budget or feel like it's necessary for us to go. And so they'll send a developer or maybe just have the factory work through those problems.
We skipped one. Design in a way relates to problem solving on a bigger scale. How diverse does industry projects give the freedom to? That's kind of an unfortunate one. I think because the brands have such specific targets, especially bigger brands, and numbers end up being the bottom line, we can understand that sustainability or being carbon neutral or pushing to something better may be the goal for a lot of these brands when it comes to the biggest scale. But when it comes down to us working on one or two shoes for a brand, we can push that agenda and pitch, for it to be only made in two pieces or get rid of this horrible material. But if they need it to be waterproof, then it needs to be coated. If they need it to be this type of traction, then it needs to be this type of rubber. And so their bottom line ends up being this particular thing needs to work in this particular way. So unless their brief really pushes the agenda of it needs to be this for a reason and it means something to, a bigger goal, we're regimented into a few ways. And obviously that affects us because we don't want to just continue making product for the sake of product. We want to have things that make a difference. And so it's something that we work on on the side when we have time is what can we do? How can we research? What can we learn that we can pitch and push and help these brands when they do come to the terms with this is important? We can say, hey, we have ideas for that already. So design research, what is a generic process you guys follow?
I think it's a little bit different for each of us, and I actually like that about our team, that we each have different ways of being inspired. Research, as far as getting inspired for me, is a little bit of everything. Looking at blogs, looking at trends, just going outside, observing people. I always push the idea of, for us designing shoes, to stop looking at shoes, look at things outside of that. That's where I tend to get the most inspired. I love looking at things like apparel or accessories or things that this consumer is also using and trying to be inspired by that.
I think for me, I get really into the people, the target consumer, the way that they interact. If a brief says that this needs to be waterproof, I love using waterproof because everybody thinks things need to be waterproof. And in reality, how many times do you jump in a 2-foot puddle of water up to your ankle that, is going to douse your foot? Like, it changes the dynamic of the shoe in so many ways, and you lose so many of the other material benefits because you coat it or you put a booty in it. That I like looking at what the real end use of the thing is going to be and who's using it and how much they're willing to pay for those features, to not necessarily contradict what the client's looking for, but to ask questions and think a little bit of like, not why, but why not? Like, why wouldn't you try something different? Why wouldn't you try and evolve it beyond that first thought of it needs this, this, and this because this retailer is going to say it has to have that. So think of the consumer first and not the retailer or the website that's going to sell the thing first.
All right, I see Hector says, thank you for questions. We'll do one more. Do you guys see yourself moving into other industries like accessories? So you guys saw that glasses project we did. I think we've talked about it as a team. We're always open to new projects. I think the reason the glasses or the eyewear project went so well was because it really was about that consumer. Consumer was very similar to some of the other brands we were working for, which made it really easy to understand who they were and where they're shopping, what they're buying, etc. I personally really like the front end stuff and the strategy, and a lot of that translates beyond just footwear or accessories brands. So I like getting into that kind of stuff. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've talked about whether it's accessories or soft goods are so similar in a lot of ways to footwear because there are hard parts on footwear. There's, fashion and soft goods uppers to footwear. We have the expertise and the understanding of them. A lot of it comes to the point of like brands having the budget in those different locations to be able to do that. Unfortunately, accessories don't get the attention they deserve a lot of times. So if you look at a brand like Nike, they outsource a lot of their accessories to an exclusive consultancy that just works on that. but they may just make really cool socks and then put a Nike logo on it. Or they may make a cool backpack and put a swoosh on it, versus thinking about the brand first and then adjusting it and making something specifically for the brand. So there's certain companies that are doing it a lot better now, and things like bags are becoming way more important, as like briefcases and things like that are so not comfortable and conducive, that backpacks and things where you carry your electronics are so important that why don't they deserve more attention? But then it's how do you make that cost effective to outsource? So we'd love to. If anybody knows anybody that's interested, we'll take a chance. But yeah, it's definitely an opportunity.
Well, thank you to both of you for being on this lunch session. I do have one more question to ask both of you. What is your favorite shoe of all time?
I don't know.
It's a pretty heavy question.
I had to say my favorite's the Nike Free, the original 5.0. I think it just helped push, like, everything is in that manner now. It's just like easy slip on, somewhat foot shaped, but not offensive. And it was just easy. It took away a lot of the things that were happening at the time in terms of had to be all leather or all plastic. It was just like a nice soft thing for your foot. And it was a good evolution from everything else that Nike had been doing with Huaraches and Prestos and all that already. And I still think it's just like the best culmination of all those features and things that they're still doing to this day.
I don't know the answer to that question. I should have thought about this before. I think I go through phases. Like when I was in college, I always said my favorite shoe was the Nike Huarache. Right now, I really like the Nike Footscape collection. But that said, I wear Vans almost every day.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much to both of you. I appreciate your time, and thank you for everyone who joined in from around the world. Your insights are extremely valuable to our community, and we really appreciate it. So everyone have a good evening. Have a good day. Thank you very much, Samantha and Eric.
For having us.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. Thank you, everyone.